welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billie. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm glad you're here. I have another really amazing interview for you today, and I feel like I say the similar thing every time I have an interview. I love this conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with you. I guess I feel very lucky that I've been able to chat with so many amazing people, and um, I genuinely am very excited about each and every single one of these conversations. So I'll just let you get to the interview and I will catch up with you later. Hey, I'm so excited for you to be here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you
Can
for having me.
oh, you're very welcome. Can you tell folks your name, pronouns, and a bit about yourself?
So my name is Billy. I am my pronouns are they, them, or she, her. I am a transgender therapist, specializing in LGBTQ plus, kink, polyamory, and sex work. And I am a psychotherapist based in New Jersey. I've been at a practice for over 3 years at this point and have regularly seen a lot of queer and trans clientele. Um, and yeah, no, that's at least the bare bones of me.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to fit it into a small, a
Those
small little
blurbs are always a
snippet, but
challenge.
yeah, they totally are. Even with practice with those, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, right. No, there's this part that I should have said. But we have time. You can always let us know if there's other things that you're like, oh, I should have said this thing.
Oh, for sure, for sure, for sure.
um, I'm really excited that you're here. It was really nice to meet you. Also, separately, I'm excited to meet someone with my name. I've never met anyone with my
I
name before.
did very much appreciate that. It's like, oh, hey Billy, hi Billy, how's it going?
Yeah, we should have started the podcast like that. Huh, missed opportunity. I guess we could end it. We could bye Billy. Bye Billy.
You could do that.
You know?
You could do that.
Yeah. So a little bit of a preview for those who are listening. Um, so I'm so excited. I'm not entirely sure where to start. So I know that there's a couple of different, not different topics. I guess one topic with like a broader spectrum. No. Anyway,
Hmm.
we have some things we want to talk about. Um, is there anywhere that feels comfortable for you to start? Do you want to talk about like your experience or?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think I'm totally fine to talk a bit of my own experience of this. So, um I came out as non-binary in probably like 2019, like 2020 or so.
Mhm.
Um, and went with that for about a year. And in 2021, I moved out on my own, and I had kind of had the thought, like, I kind of want to dabble with like gender presentation a little bit and maybe not particularly look like a masked body.
Mhm.
And sure enough, like the first time that like I was able to kind of fem up my appearance, it felt like several puzzle pieces just clicking together simultaneously. And I was like, oh, so I socially transitioned first, probably in like
Mhm.
May of 2021 or so. And then decided to make the jump to medically transition in August of 2021. Um, and so at this point, I've been on HRT since August of 2021. So at this point, 2.5 years. Um, and it is a very endlessly fascinating thing. I think to really attest to the experience of like a body as it medically is changing up and like as your endocrine system really changes. It's very fascinating, I find. I definitely feel very fortunate in the way that mine has gone because with HRT, it is absolutely your mileage may vary.
Mhm.
So I lucked out that I got some good mileage, we'll say.
That's good. That's good. Do you mind explaining just for folks who are listening who might not know what HRT is?
Oh, absolutely. So HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy. It is a medical step that many trans people take in order to, kind of get closer to alignment as far as like with their gender identity. Um, it basically does allow for the like change of one's endocrine system and like changing up our hormones in order to get the masculinizing or feminizing effects that would have happened in puberty had we had the other puberty. So
Mhm,
another way to think about this for anybody at home who's like, okay, like what exactly? The easiest way for me to word this is basically saying I'm going to go through puberty again,
mhm, that's a good way of
except
explaining
the
it.
other one.
Mhm,
So um with HRT, basically the barest bones I can provide here. For masculinizing HRT, it's as simple as just taking testosterone in some iteration. Those effects usually hit pretty quickly, anywhere from like 1 to 6 months. Usually, a lot of those effects start to happen. In feminizing HRT, it is that one takes estradiol, estrogen, in conjunction with some sort of hormone blocker, just
mm,
because testosterone is stronger than estrogen, so a blocker is necessary
mhm,
to have the feminizing effects. So as a result of this, the endocrine system needing to kind of go through that, feminizing HRT's effects take longer to really
mm.
start. Like minor things happen in the first 6 months, but not terribly significant. Usually, a lot of people who go trans femme would expect to see a lot of those changes happen in about the 6 to 12 month mark typically.
Oh, yeah?
So yeah, and then
Hmm,
basically minute changes happen thereafter, like pretty much over the remaining years. Um and typically most HRT will kind of hit the like full extent of what they're going to do at about 3 years or
hmm,
so. Not to say little changes don't still happen even after those 3 years, but typically that's about the route that you would look to see.
yeah. Oh, cool. That's cool. So you for if you're taking the HRT for trans femme, you would like the trans femme hormones, you would, um, you might not start to see changes until 6 to 12 months into it. Is that did I say that right?
I mean, it's a fair way to think about it. Like you'll see minor things. Like
Mm,
there were definitely a few things that even in like my experience of it, I felt pretty early on, even within those first few months. But I would say probably around for me personally, month 7 was
mhm,
particularly when I
mm.
started to really, really notice like, oh, whoa, this is changing a lot now. Most notably, comically, I learned that in the form of, "Hey, bitch, your pants don't fit anymore."
Oh,
And
yeah.
the funniest part of this was learning that, and then a few days later seeing a few, like, trans femme friends of mine and saying, like, "Fuck, like, I needed to, like, go shopping and, like, get entirely new pants." And like,
Mhm.
"Oh, right, yeah, no, we should have warned you." I'm like, "You could have just told me!" And it's
Oh,
like,
that's
"Yeah,
a
I forgot, sorry." And I was like, "Whatever."
it's a common part of it then, just needing to get different pants.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, with feminizing HRT, like really a lot of things do happen. I mean, like breast development is absolutely a pretty big one. Some slight
Mhm,
changes in voice, not enormous, like as would happen with like masculinizing HRT, because
mm,
those vocal changes are way more significant. But also too, like the fat distribution in one's body, because like while your bone structure doesn't change, your fat distribution absolutely does. So
mhm,
instead of having like a straight frame as one would have if you were a mask body, it kind of curves out. So
mhm.
yeah, your girl got curves.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that would be I mean, if you're, like, wait, like, for the 7 months where you just haven't seen much, and then all of a sudden it was changes like that, that must have been a wild
Yeah, I think what it
experience.
yeah, I would say what it kind of felt like it's kind of that idea of like, day to day, you don't really notice a lot happening, but
Mhm,
then once like a large amount of time is compounded, you're like, whoa, like a lot happened.
mhm,
Like in retrospect, like, I saw little bits of changes happening in the first like 6 months, usually more in like I would say probably more in like the 4 or 5 month mark is when I started to be like, oh, okay, like something's definitely happening here.
mhm.
And then, yeah, once I really hit like months like 7 through 9, I was like, whoa, okay, this changed quite a bit. And
Yeah.
I think the other point with HRT that I think is important to note is that a lot more does still continue to happen beyond year one. I think a lot of people, and I will say that I've kind of noticed this a lot myself as a healthcare provider for transgender health, is that a lot of emphasis is placed on the first year of one's HRT, whereas things still happen and continue to kind of go through their progressions even like after year one. And
Mhm,
so I definitely think it important for people to be like aware that like, yeah, like stuff still happens beyond that. It's
mhm,
mind you continuation of things that happen. But like again, we want to think in a similar like realm to, actual puberty as we may typically look at it in cisgender people.
mhm. Yeah, that's important to say. Thank you for talking about that, and thank you for explaining that, all of that.
Of course.
I having this thing where there's so many things that I wanna ask about, and my brain's having a hard time picking which one to go with first. Well, I guess I'll ask first, if there is there anything that you would like to share about your experience with, starting to take HRT, or do you feel like you got all of the stuff out that you
um
wanted to say?
I would say that my journey with transition was definitely it was definitely an uncommon experience of it, and one thing that I am regularly quick to say of my experience was that I was very lucky. I would say I had one of the more positive experiences with transition that I think like a lot of people really tend to experience. Um, and mind you, I think there are a few variables that I think really contribute to that. Part of it being that, um, as much as I don't necessarily love the concept of passing, and I'm very quick to kind of rebuke elements of that because I'm like, well, I mean, ideally we shouldn't have to worry about that, but it is of course a relevant concern, so I don't necessarily completely like I don't knock it necessarily.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I mean, for me, I very comfortably passed even from the get go, so it wasn't terribly difficult for me. I didn't really like I think a lot of trans folks kind of allude to the idea of like a life tax paid where like you don't necessarily match like what you're going for right away. I kind of cheated that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I learned to do makeup very early. I had figured out like wearing wigs and things like that and had been able to pretty quickly, change up my appearance to as far as gender presentation went to a very high femme presentation, which really has always made it quite easy and no one's really thought anything of it. Nobody's really
Mhm.
thought anything amiss of it. And a lot of what I've heard from friends and people that have met me over the years, they're like, if you didn't say you were trans, I wouldn't know. And I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Um, so I will say that is definitely one element of it, and a variable that I don't discount either because I do think it kind of contributed to it was honestly I think there was kind of a little bit of pretty privilege that played into that because I ended up looking as I do, and it ended up that people responded very well to that. So I think part of what I experienced is why as to why a lot of people really accepted it was because they're like, oh, whoa, they're really, really pretty now. Whoa, and that I think was definitely a really big contributor to it as well. As for I guess just like other tidbits as far as like my own personal transition, notable thing I did as well. The first year or so that I was on HRT, I took estradiol by oral tablet, and then after about a year and change, I switched to doing weekly injections. Um, and for the people at home, typically for anybody on HRT, you can either take pills if your body can take that, 'cause some bodies do not. There are subdermal things, gel or patches that people take and use, or it can be done by way of injection, which is done weekly on like in like an intramuscular injection. So, I personally went from oral tablets to injections, and I've been on injections for about a year and a half at this point.
Mhm. Thank you. It's helpful to say as well that um, there are the different methods of taking the HRT too. I didn't know that. I think I'd heard of some of them, but I don't think knew necessarily that there were. I actually don't know if I knew that there was a pill version or not. But anyway,
Yep,
thank you for explaining that.
of course.
Um, sorry, I just coughed and I thought I got all of it out of the all of it out of the podcast, but tiny little bit snuck in there. So you work a lot with a lot of trans folks as well. Is there things that like you said that your experience is quite you said well I think your words were that you got did you say you got lucky? I don't want to misquote you.
Oh, yeah. No, I will say
Um
that it was absolutely luck
yeah.
to a good degree.
Yeah.
Genetics kind of favored my transition. I've joked with people that the universe was kind of like, "Hey, so we messed it up the first time. We're sorry. I know our bad, but hey, you're gonna have a really good time with the
Mhm.
second try at this. Have fun." And I was like, "Yep." The universe is like, "Let's go."
Let's go. That's cute. I like that a lot. Not all folks who transition have that luck, eh? Some folks have a harder time of it.
I would say that, yeah, there are definitely people whose transitions are a little bit harder just in the fact that their bodies may not respond quite the same way as like other people's bodies did.
Mhm.
And I think like, especially one point that I tend to highlight with clients because, I think one idea that does kind of come about um is basically it boils down to the idea of like, am I trans enough? Like, do I
Mm.
check the boxes to justify a medical transition or, to really say that I fit this title? And I find that like one thing that I point to is like, when people see the representation of trans people on social media, you see these people that are very like done up in some form or fashion. There is a curation that happens in social media content.
Mhm.
And so, we see very polished iterations of transness. And I think sometimes people think that, well, my iteration may not have that sort of like polishing to it. And I find that like my thing is, I'm like, if you've gotten so far as to like, in the case of my clientele who are coming to me as a therapist saying, like, hey, this is what I want to talk about. I'm like, if you have gotten to the point to which you decided to go to a healthcare professional who specializes in transgender health to then say, like, do I pass the bar to like do the thing? I'm like, if you got this far, yeah, no, you do. And even if you
Mhm.
hadn't gone this far, yeah, you do. Um, so I think a lot of it is that people fear that like their iteration of it will not necessarily be like sufficient to the title. But
Yeah.
I find like if you were thinking and really questioning, like, wow, wonder what it would be like to be the literal other gender, and that is a thought that you have with like a good amount of recurrence, and then you start to continue to progress as far as like really researching it and doing all that stuff. Like if you're going to the lengths at which you are doing all of that, then yes, the answer is you are most certainly trans enough. And I would think like, yes, you are passing you are passing the bar to, you know, claim the title. And even
Mhm.
if you don't medically transition, you still can make that like you still can take that title and still claim that.
Mhm. I wish we could highlight things in a podcast. That would be a thing I would highlight. I think it's so important to just I feel like that's such an important thing for people to hear. Um, I had this come up different different experience, but when I before I started to come out as non-binary, I had the similar feeling of like, oh, I'm not binary enough. Like
Hmm.
maybe I'm not enough. Like I don't meet the criteria. And I had a conversation with a friend who was non-binary, and they were like,
Hmm.
if you feel like not non-binary, like if you feel I don't remember how they phrased it actually, but they had said they felt the exact same way when they started. Maybe they weren't enough. And I'm not saying
Hmm.
this is that this is the same situation, but I found it very helpful to hear someone else be like, "Oh no, I felt like that too." Um,
I think with non-binary gender identities, I find that that is also quite a common tale because I think again, if we look at polished iterations of
Mhm.
like non-binariness that exist in social media, you see these people that are like absolutely like divinely androgynous and,
Mhm.
again, like a very polished iteration of that. So it then again points us back to the question of like, am I androgynous enough or am I really going for that? Or like, if I don't have that, do I get to claim that title? And the answer is still, if it is something you feel, then it is something that you can absolutely claim
Mhm.
too. Like my specific gender identity, the way I describe that is I am a non binary trans femme person. And while, yes, I have absolutely done things to transition, and while I generally do present very femme, my actual answer is I am non-binary. And that
Mhm.
has been the answer that I've stayed with for many years. So I think it's very much just a case that like people feel in some way like they can't necessarily claim that when like you absolutely can.
Yeah, yeah, you absolutely can. And I don't mean to take away from our conversation today. I just found it so interesting that to hear that that's a experience that folks have,
Oh,
um,
very common. Yeah.
with starting to like come out and identify or self come out? No.
Yeah. Self identify
Yeah,
and then eventually kind of coming
yeah,
out in a broader sense of it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and I just really appreciate what you said, that it's if you are questioning and if you're there, if you're at that stage, if it's come up, then yes.
Yeah. Cause the way I've worded it to clientele is like, if it was that you like that it was some way even questionable, like I think of it through the lens of someone who is cisgender, who was assigned a sex at birth and then told that your gender identity is in alignment with your sex at birth. And they all just nodded and said, okay, sounds good. And they lived that life comfortably and never particularly questioned it, and at least never in like any sort of like substantial way.
Mhm,
Whereas for someone who is, likely in some manner gender diverse, they're going to have that question. And that question doesn't just like go away. That is a question that you ask. And it is a question that you really thoroughly examine. And that to me suggests that someone who's like not truly cisgender is going to really meaningfully seek that out and really contemplate that question and go the lengths that you have to. A cisgender person will simply never really encounter that in a substantial way.
mhm, mhm. I really like it. I really like that. Really like the way you're explaining everything. I'm just catching myself, like, being quiet for a minute. I'm like, "No, no, you gotta say something, it's a podcast." But I'm, like, digesting all the things you're saying because I mean, I know that you work in this area, so it's not a surprise that you talk about this so well, but just the way you're explaining everything is so I just love it all so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I don't really know how to, like, smoothly transitioned into asking this question. I
You're
couldn't
fine.
think of a, like, a funny or not funny, but, like, a clever transition. So I'm just gonna, like, just go right
Have at
go
it.
right to it. And I just because I know we talked about this beforehand. For anyone who's like, "Oh, this is a jump." We talked about talking about this before, but, do you mind like, talking a little bit about either your experience or in general, how taking HRT and, transitioning, like, what happens with your cycle, your
Ah,
hormones and all
yes, yes,
that?
yes. So, the interaction between menstrual cycles and HRT is actually it's a quite interesting one. So to speak on both ends of it, because I think both are relevant, for anyone at home who may not necessarily be aware of how this works, if you go on masculinizing HRT, essentially you go through menopause.
Hmm,
Like it pretty much stops someone who's going on masculinizing HRT cycle in about 3 months from when they start. So again, another iteration of those effects happen relatively quickly.
mhm,
So as a result, people who go trans mask often lose their periods pretty quickly. Um, as for feminizing HRT, within some number of months, um, someone who goes trans femme does start to experience hormonal cycles and do actually experience having periods. So this is one of those things that I think is one of those people don't really think about it, but it's a thing that happens is that trans women get periods just as well as cis women do. Mind you, the presentation of those things is absolutely different because, of course, we're talking very different anatomy, but effects still happen the same way because human bodies still will experience that. So the way I've kind of likened this idea and kind of my best way of describing it was to say that it's essentially I think of it almost like a period light, so to speak. Because obviously we don't have like uterine lining to shed or anything like that. So basically the two main features of feminine like trans femme periods is cramping does still happen and the mood swings absolutely still happen.
Mhm.
Um, and mind you, there may be particular points of nuance to that that may be different person to person. At least speaking directly to my experience of it, that is about the nature of what will happen with me. A lot of like mood instability and mood swing a few days prior to it, and then I'll go through like a day or two of cramping that goes from like pretty mild to like quite intense. So,
Mhm. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you talked about both as well, um, both shifts in hormone cycles. Do you find that like the period cycle is like fairly consistent? Like it's feels fairly
mm,
consistent month to month? Just out of curiosity.
fairly so. I would say that typically my experience of it has been that it does happen in more or less a monthly cycle. Sometimes it does feel like it does start to happen a little sooner or a little
Hmm.
later than typical, but more or less I can expect either like towards the middle of a month or towards the end of a month, I will likely be experiencing some symptoms. I think where my cycle is at now, I'm like towards the end of the month typically.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a cool. That's very interesting. We did an episode. I don't know how long ago now when we're airing this, but about hormone cycle and talked about the particular hormones that take over. I wish I put my notes in front of me, but not take over, but the hormones that are dominant for the first half and second half of um, period cycles.
Okay.
And yeah, I just I wanted like what was missing from that episode is talking about trans hormone cycles.
Hmm.
Um, and I just wanted to make sure. I know that we don't have to make this whole episode about that, but I wanted to talk about it because I had a couple people ask about it, and I had, I feel like it's a very important part to include in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think the mood swing component of HRT and I think that it's important to give it proper service for whether it be masculinizing or feminizing HRT. Like these mood swings do absolutely happen. And I think it to be very important to like in my line of work, really help people to kind of understand the emotions and kind of their process through them, whether it be for people on masculinizing HRT who are kind of getting these like bouts of frustrations and anger and are not necessarily experiencing sadness in the same way. We kind of talk through how to kind of like navigate some like kind of different waters emotionally and kind of being able to work through that as it happens. And then on the flip side, for people going on feminizing HRT, helping people kind of to be able to navigate and cope through like having these abrupt waves of sadness or like really intense thinking and just being able to kind of help people as they move through that and kind of understanding that their endocrine system is having quite this effect on their brains. So
Yeah.
I think it's to be very important to really cover that ground. And I think people neglect to consider that like cycles, especially on feminizing HRT, do happen. Like I think that there were a few instances when I was transitioning where I was like, I recognized that no one told me that, and I kind of wish somebody had. And
Mhm.
I'd say the two were, "Hey, you're gonna need to replace your pants in about 7 months." And the other was that, like, "Hey, you will experience periods and, that might look different for you than it might look
Mhm.
for me, but it is a thing that happens, and, just mentally be prepared
Yeah.
for what you may experience there," because I think having these bouts of just intense emotionality, and even for me, a licensed therapist, someone who has myself been in therapy for 7.5 years, like, even to the best of my own ability, and I am someone who I would like to say is rather adept with a lot of this stuff and how to manage and cope and process their feelings. Even then, it's still really hard.
It
So
is, yeah.
I think it to really be important to say, like, yeah, no, it's not quite that easy.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too, because, um, I mean, I had this perception before doing these that obviously that cycles could hormone cycles and hormones in general could impact can have a big impact, but I feel like when we went by what we went through, estrogen dominant, progesterone dominant, and just I guess because it was like a couple of hours long for 2 different episodes about how much, different hormones affect us, and it's not I don't know. I don't know if there's this idea that it's a simple thing because it's not talked about very much,
Mm,
but, it's just so interesting. It's like it has such a big effect on, um and it's just such a big effect on how you feel in your body, how your body feels, and it shifts throughout the whole month.
mhm,
If you are on the, like, period cycle, we talked a little bit about, like, testosterone cycle and how it's I think I'm not an expert, just to put that out there,
mm,
but I think that she had said it was, like, once like, it's, like, more daily than, um the period cycle is more obviously, like, month-ish long,
mm,
um and it totally makes sense that, um, that would be an like, not only would it be an adjustment because 'cause you're going from either, like, a day to 28 days or 29 days or whatever, or
yep.
the other way around, but also it's gonna look and feel, I would imagine, so different. I think that's a very important thing to highlight.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, for people that go more like the masculinizing HRT route, like having to kind of go through swings of emotion that happen a lot more within the same day versus like with feminizing HRT, where it's kind of these more like longer progressions of it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, like, the actual yeah, the like, the wavelength or however you would say it is
Oh,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
different. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm really, I wish that this stuff was talked about more because I feel like
I agree heavily because
yeah.
I think kind of to touch on a major trope within like trans healthcare right now, I think, we got to look at the climate, particularly, not even in just
Yes.
the US, because I think, the US are obviously the biggest example that we're going to be able to immediately look at as two people that I'm assuming are both in the US.
I'm in Canada, but yes,
In Canada. Okay.
mhm.
So then it is slightly different there. But even then, like, just to see these sorts of attacks on transgender health
Yeah.
everywhere for really very boogeymaning reasons. And, I think there is a lot of stress and anxiety that is being held around like kind of this public portrayal of the metaphoric trans person, because basically what I'm kind of seeing is like trans men are kind of, they're just like, whatever, we don't really care about all that, but I mean, like, if we hit you too, whatever. But it's really the boogeymaning, especially of trans women, and like a lot of the trans misogyny that has been kind of coming about over the last like year or so, and not even just like in America, but I think it is something that is being seen in many countries. um but I think there is a very held anxiety about kind of the state of affairs with regard to that. And I think so much of it would really be like, it would be very easy to dissuade it when people look at the actual data associated with it. And I think the arguments that have been made against trans care and against trans presence in public life really neglect a lot of trans people, like I think fundamentally trans people not being in any of those conversations should really tell you a lot about the policy making that is taking place. It is not being done with actual consideration and actual meaningful looks at transgender care. And I think
Mhm.
that has been, I think, the most frustrating component of it, because, it should say a lot that there are lawmakers, even in like the state senate in my state, who are trying to like push for this legislation. And I think to myself how I want to go to the state capitol and testify and be like, hey, so for all of you that made this point to say, oh yeah, this is policy that we want to push, why didn't you call an expert? I never got a phone call. Was there a reason that you never called me,
Mhm.
except to say that you're not interested in the actual science of that. You're
Yeah.
not interested in understanding the data that, really backs transgender care. And there is a lot of it, to be very
Yeah.
clear. There's so much that really says, no, this care is valuable. It is very rarely even regretted. It has so many positive health benefits, not even just physically, but mentally. We see
Mhm.
so many changes and so many dramatic drop offs in like depression, suicidality. There are so many numbers that really just loudly say that this care is safe, this care is beneficial, this care really does save lives and change lives. And I think that it's so important for people to truly understand, like, this care is not dangerous. This care does not hurt anybody. This care allows people to just exist there in their lives with way greater comfort. And the boogeymaning that has been created around policies is based in this caricature of the trans woman, quote unquote, who's really just a man trying to be predatory in femme spaces, when we see just nothing that backs that. It is
Mhm.
just a weaponization of a caricature to
Mhm.
kind of go at people. And it's just not aligned with reality, because, I think if I have heard one thing time and again, like as the true spoken message of trans people and of queer people as a whole, it's like, y'all, we're just trying to live.
Yeah.
Like, that is all we're trying to do. We are not trying to, like, invade your spaces. We're not trying to, like, you know, change everybody over in this act of corruption. We just want to exist and live our lives according to the gender that fits us, and according to, our iterations of sexual orientation, romantic orientation, that suit us and allow us to live our lives in the way that aligns with like who we know ourselves to be. And
Yeah.
I think so much of the government intervention around that, saying, well, no, we want to say in that, and our say is don't you dare, is honestly so audacious and so frustrating to really kind of be trying to sit through in this landscape. It is not easy. It is
Mhm.
not easy right now. And I've always been very much one to keep it real with my clientele. I'm like, look, I'm not going to tell you it's all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and everything's all good and everything's going to be fine. Things are scary, and it is okay for us to agree that things are scary right now.
Mhm.
And I hope that that pressure comes off, that people really just drop from this issue. But I can never make that promise to anybody, and I would feel disingenuous in my work to say, "Oh, everything's gonna be all good. Like, we don't have anything to worry about," because the fact is, right now we do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. And I feel like, um, in terms of like policymakers and people who are not trans or not queer, it to me, it seems like the easiest fucking thing to do, just
Mhm.
to listen. All that's all you just have to listen
Yep.
to people who are actually trans, who are actually queer. Listen, it's not hard to find the data. It's not hard to see the actual case that it's
Yeah.
people just want to exist. They want to feel safe to exist,
Mhm.
and that's it. It's like it's not a difficult issue, but they are making it a difficult issue
Oh,
by
yeah. Like,
creating all these policies and
I
bullshit.
heard this quote literally, like, 2 days ago, and honestly, it has had such staying power in my mind since I heard it. It was this idea that a gay man was presenting about, like, being gay is honestly very easy. It is straight people that make it difficult.
Mm,
And when I heard that, I was like, "Whoa," like, I needed a second to really, like, sit with that because when we think about it, the policymakers are often cis hetero people,
yeah.
and these are people that are very blind to a world and to queer existence and trans existence in a way that they really just do not have the same sensitivities, the same understandings of it, and they are the ones fundamentally making things more complicated for queer people and for trans people to just exist. And I think
Mhm.
that to me really says a lot about where leadership really intends for things to go. And, I think it is just asinine that we are facing such demonizations when we're not even doing anything revolutionary. We're
Yeah.
choosing rather we're choosing rather humble existences and saying we just want to be able to love who we want to love. We want to be able to, have autonomy over our bodies and the decisions we make with it.
Mhm.
And that really is a lot of what it is. We're not trying to do anything Herculean. We're not trying to, like, convert everybody we want to. We're just living lives that, for reasons I cannot properly fathom, people just do not want us to truly have because it is in some way, like, abhorrent to the existence that they would rather us have.
Yeah.
And that, I think, says a lot of kind of where things are right now.
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely does. It's, baffling to me that there's baffling is not a big enough word. I've heard the whole, um I don't know if trope is the right word, where it's like, "Oh, you're so brave," but, like, it shouldn't be fucking brave. You should just
Oh, yeah.
just wanting to exist is not should not be seen as brave,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's the circumstances that we are in right now that is, um,
Yeah.
I feel like the idea in my head is like, "Oh, this is so well worded." When I say it out loud, it's like, "Eh?"
But honestly though, I really truly get that, Billy, like, this idea that, you know, it's seen as something so courageous to have this authenticity,
Mhm,
and the thing is that it's not it's not that it's necessarily brave,
mhm,
it's that we stepped forth in whatever confident or hesitant steps to say, well, I think that's what I want to do. And
yeah,
it's almost this it feels like it's very easily something that a mirror can be put back to somebody who says, like, oh my god, you're so brave for that. And the question can really easily be thrown back to be like, is there a reason that you're not?
oh my god, I love that, that's so powerful.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's powerful. I gotta remember that. Gotta keep that. That's so good. Um, oh my god, I love that so much. Um, I think it's very important like that we're talking about policymakers and stuff like this because you're absolutely right. We can't ignore the climate circumstances. The
Hmm.
other thing I want to mention, and this is information that I have based on hearing other people's experiences, not my experience um, going about this. I just want to make that part clear. But in Canada, it's I've had at least where I am in Canada, I'm in Ontario.
Mm.
Um, this has kind of all happened, within, I don't know, let's say like 3, 4 hours of Toronto area. For I know a lot of people who don't live in Canada go. A lot of people seem to go based on how close you are to Toronto.
Uh,
Um, Anyway, I've had a few friends who are trans and have wanted to go down the like wanted to make the step of medically transitioning. And the wait list for just trying to the process that they have to go through with the actual doctors is
Mm.
bullshit in itself. That's like and I again, I'm not an expert in this, but I just feel like it's so important to put out there as well
Mm.
that I've had people who've, been on a wait list or had known people who've been on a wait list for months and months
Oh,
and
yeah.
months just to be listened to, or people who've had to like advocate for themselves way too much for like doctors to actually take themselves seriously.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I can't speak to what it is like in the States, but I know that I mean, we can't have every single thing in this conversation, I guess, because then we'll be here forever, unfortunately. Not unfortunately because I'm speaking with you, but unfortunately because there's so many bullshit things that are happening within the world with trans care and trans rights. But um, just because we were talking about some of this stuff, I feel like that part's important to name. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, you know, hearing that to be the case in Canada, like, I'm not at all surprised by that, and I think, um, in England, there's been very similar tale of that with the NHS
Hmm.
and getting care through them. Like, a lot of trans people have been subject to wait lists that are entire years long.
Hmm.
And what a lot of people have done in response is kind of just going DIY with HRT and just kind of taking it into their own hands to say, well, I'm not going to wait for you. I'm going to just do it.
Hmm.
And, you know, there is, of course, a very delicate process to that, and of course, I personally can never, like, particularly condone it, but I understand, of course, why people do it, and thankfully, there are many fantastic transhumans on the internet who help others to kinda navigate DIY care if you really need to do it. Of course, I don't want for anyone to have to get there, and of course, I would ideally love it if, enough providers were competent in this enough to be
Hmm.
able to assist people properly as they need to in order to get proper trans care and just to be able
Hmm.
to kind of maintain people's well-being.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely.
I will
Um,
say
oh,
just to kind of speak of it, like there is definitely a good number of clinics throughout the US that do provide that care. Um, Speaking very personally to where I am in New Jersey, thankfully I have at least like 3 or 4 different options for doing that, but it is absolutely a bit of a challenge to kind of find all that. So I will say
mhm.
it is a bit of a slog.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that you wish people knew, that I know we're kind of getting close to the time we had allotted, but is there anything else that you wish people knew more or
Um, I think the only other thing I can think to kind of throw out there, um, I think it's kind of fundamentally understanding, like, if someone is going to say, like, this is who I am, and, especially as people are kind of doing that work to really change things in alignment to who they are, um, I think good allyship really comes from believing people. I think it comes from making points to accept that, and if there are points of lacking understanding, independently seeking out those answers, and I think making a point to get greater understanding of it. Um, hopefully, I would like to hope that our conversation here, Billy, provides one such resource for people, so that way, like,
Mhm,
if people need like kind of a very down to earth, like, what is this? What happens to this
mhm,
person when they do this? That this may provide one such resource for that, and be something that people can point to say, yeah, like that's someone who is trans, who knows that experience, who works with
mhm,
people who are going through that experience, outright telling you like this is pretty much everything you need to know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, exactly. Please do share this with anyone who you think might use this resource. Speaking to people listening, literally share this with as many people who you think might benefit from this
absolutely.
resource as possible, because I think all of this stuff needs to be out there and readily available.
Mm.
Hmm.
And I'd say the only other bit while I have my little moment on the soapbox, so to speak, is especially for anyone who would claim themselves an ally to trans people and to queer people, protect them. I think that part is absolutely paramount, and I think there is an importance right now with all that is happening around us and kind of just this idea that a lot of lawmakers are really kind of not hearing the average person. If we are not to be heard by the powers that be, then I think we need to have important, like a lot of emphasis placed on our communities and keeping our networks strong within our more like meso level, micro level, like having those individuals, those groups, those communities is really so valuable. And I think making our points to kind of lean more towards community and towards each other and into each other rather than, looking for solutions above us that I just don't have a lot of confidence will come right at this time.
Hmm.
So, really be there for your queer and trans friends. I think that part is important for your friends, your family that are queer or trans. We all need each other right now. And I
Hmm.
think that is an important thing to really take.
Yeah, very important and very powerfully said as well. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge and experience. Um, is there anywhere that you would like people to follow you or anything? I forgot to ask you this before we hit record. If there isn't, you can
Um,
just say no, but
I don't really have anything particular to like my trans healthcare work per se. But if pointing around on the internet enough, you can probably find me, especially for anybody in the state of New Jersey who's seeking care. You know, I can be
Mhm.
found.
Yeah. And if you're listening and you do have questions, you can always, I don't know if this is on Apple as well, but I know that it's on Spotify. If you scroll down, there should be a little thing that says, "What do you think about this episode?" Because I never changed the suggested question. If you have any questions, you can just pop them in there, and I will either I will get back to you based on other people's information, or if it seems like there's enough for another episode, maybe I will ask if Billy's willing to come back.
For sure.
Um,
I'd be down.
yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, I love this conversation. I feel like I could talk. I feel like I could just keep on going, but we have a lot of an hour, and I want to be really respectful of your time because I didn't ask you beforehand. If this is the other thing I forgot to ask, if you had a specific time you had to absolutely go at. So anyway, thank you so much
Of
for being here.
course.
I so appreciate your time and all of the things you shared. Thank you.
Awesome. I mean, thank you so much again for having me and, definitely glad that I could speak to a lot of things that maybe people didn't know quite as much about. So,
Yeah.
again, thank you for having me so much. And just that way we said we actually did the thing. Bye, Billy.
Bye. Bye, Billy. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot to say my part. Bye, Billy.
Bye, Billy.
Thank you so much for listening. Please do use the either send me an email info at movewithbillie, BILLIE.com if you have any questions, anything you want us to chat about next time, because Billy will be coming back. We're going to do another episode at some point in the future. So feel free to send any messages, any questions, they can be anonymous. I don't have to, say who is from. Um, Especially I won't say your name on the podcast if you don't want to. So you can keep it as anonymous as possible, but send any questions or feedback, anything like that, to that email. And as for personal updates, I don't think I have. I feel like I do have some, but I can't think of much. I've been um just been really loving doing these interviews. It does feel odd because I've had a few of you say that you enjoyed the episode where it was just me talking because it was a bit of a catch up, that you liked the interviews, but you also liked that. So I'm excited that every fifth episode, and this you'll have an extra one coming up an extra bonus, extra special episode, I think anyway. It's a little self-serving, but I feel like a lot of you will enjoy it anyway. But every fifth episode will be just me, and we'll have lots of time to catch up with stuff then. Um, Otherwise, you can use if you're looking to, I'm just going to do like a little brief little ad. I'm not getting paid to say this, but I do get paid if you use the link. So I use Offering Tree for my website, and I love it because I can do my newsletter, take payments, put all of my on demand on there. It's everything in one spot, which is a small business. It's such a relief. I used to have several different things, several different, like paying for several different subscriptions to try to get something to meet my needs, and it was still kind of lacking. So, and actually, Offering Tree often does updates. So they're updating and like um, adding on cool stuff all the time. So if you are interested in starting a website, whether you want to use it as an integration into your current website, like if you want to add an on-demand page or whatever, or if you're looking to start a website, if you use a link in the show notes, you get a discount, like a very good discount. And I do get a little bit of money. If you want to support this podcast and you're interested in starting your business, that's a great way of doing it. And you don't have to do on demand like yoga classes, right? They could be like little workshops or like little whatever type of business you run. It would be great for it. Otherwise, I want to say thank you to Elise for doing the transcriptions for all of these interviews and all of these episodes lately. Super extremely appreciate her for all of her work. And is there anything else? I'm not sure if I have other pressing updates. It feels a little bit weird, but I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for listening to this episode. I loved it. I'm excited for next time. Please take a second to rate, review, and subscribe this podcast. The listenership has gone up. I'm not going to say it's like hundreds of listens an episode yet, but it has gone up a significant chunk lately, and I really appreciate that. I love that. If you could help me out even more by rate, review, subscribe, and share this with all your friends so we can um, really get some of the information that's in these episodes out there, because a lot of this needs to be known. It needs to be more shared because it's really fucking important, and lives are depending on how we trans lives are, and trans and queer lives are depending on us as a society to keep them us safe. um and how do I say this? That did not come out right, but this is really fucking important, and it is a matter of life and death. There are far too many trans and queer folks and children in North America who lose their lives because of poor treatment, because of bullying, because of stigma, because they don't have a welcoming family or friends, because they don't have the ability to transition in their state. We need to talk more about this. It's fucking important. So please send this out to all sorts of people. Thank you for listening. I will talk to you next time. If you want to keep in touch with me in the meantime, you can subscribe to my newsletter. Link is in the show notes. You'll get a bunch of freebies if you do that too, like free classes and stuff. And then if you go to my social media is at Move with Billie, Billie, and I hang out more on Instagram than Facebook and TikTok, but newsletter is the best place to catch up with me. So thank you again for listening. I will talk to you soon. Bye.